the resident economist of the House of Representatives and the principal author of the CREATE Law and the other packages of the Comprehensive Tax Reform Program of the government, Congressman Joey Sarte Salceda. But before we begin, let me just acknowledge our national officers present in the room, beginning with our chairman of the board, Mr. Mars Mendoza, our national president, Gino Olivares, our director emeritus, Engineer Jefferson Bongat, and other officers present in the room also, Mr. Charlie Tan, Attorney Christopher Ryan, Paulo Roman Perez, Fiona King, Rosabel Villanueva, Lawrence Alvarez, Cesar Wee, Fernand Imperial, Nicole Choa, Jovi Capa, and of course our presidents and representatives from our local chapters in North Luzon, Central Luzon, Barzon, Cebu, Bohol, Bicol, Davao, Northern Mindanao, Bukidnon, Pagadian, and Zamboanga. We acknowledge as well our friends from other associations present from the Subdivision Housing Developers Association and the National Real Estate Association. Let's begin with our program. Let's begin our program with a welcome message from our national president, Mr. Gino Olivares. Sir Gino.
Honorable Congressman Joey Salceda, real estate practitioners and friends, as we say in the real estate industry, good morning. Welcome to another episode of the OSHDP Housing Talks 2021. The challenges brought by the COVID-19 pandemic on the national economy has given us lessons on proper allocation of resources. Resources are assumed to be scarce or less than the need for it. Hence, resources need to be applied to sectors that will not only do the most good, generate jobs, trigger activities in allied industries, and related sector. The real estate practitioners have taken pride and remain strong of their business as having a high multiplier effect. This effect eventually resulted in more tax revenues collected by the government. Nonetheless, housing also creates a higher tax base for the government. Today, we are privileged to have one of the leading and renowned economists in the legislature, Honorable Congressman Joey Salceda. He will discuss and further enlighten us the government stimulus measures in housing and in other industries. This is timely for DTI and BOI are already preparing the priority sectors for the incentives under the implementation of the largest stimulus package for businesses in the form of the reduced corporate income tax and effective fiscal incentive systems, or the CREATE Law. Without further ado, I now formally open this forum with a warm welcome and appreciation to OSHDP members, participants, our guests, as well as our friends and supporters. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the forum.
Thank you very much, President Gino. And now to formally introduce our special guest for today, may I call on one of our national directors and the Mr. Fernand Imperial, who will also be our moderator for today. Sir Fernand.
Yeah, thank you, Jerwin. Um, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to be able to introduce our current speaker. Currently on his second term as Congressman of Albay 2nd District, Representative Joey Sarte Salceda is the chairperson of the House Committee on Ways and Means. He is co-chairperson of the Economic Stimulus Response Package Cluster, ESRP, of the Defeat COVID Special Committee. He's also the vice chairperson of the House Committee on Appropriations and Committee on Economic Affairs, this 18th Congress. Representative Salceda is the principal author of RA 11467, the Syntax Law of 2020, and RA 10931, the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Act of 2017. He's also the co-author of 3 other laws, namely Republic Act number 10963, the Tax Reform for Acceleration and Inclusion, TRAIN Act, Republic Act number 11035, an act institutionalizing the Balik Scientist Program, and Republic Act number 10928, 10 years validity of Philippine passports. Cong Joey is a legislator for many other legislations, not just the ones that I've just previously mentioned. Representative Salceda was a former three-term governor of the province of Albay and three-term congressman of the 3rd District of the said province. In the 90s, Cong Joey was among the top market analysts in Asia before entering politics. Prior to being elected congressman, he took various leading positions in international investment companies, investment banks. He was also co-chair of the United Nations Green Climate Fund when he was our governor here in Albay. The work that Cong Joey has done for our community and the nation is highly admirable. He has helped me personally in my political career, and I can confidently say that I wouldn't be where I am without his support. So without further ado, our speaker, Cong Joey Sarte Salceda.
Thank you very much. Actually, Fernand and I are go a long way back. I think even in bloodline, I think we share the same. But before that, I would like to thank the organization of Socialized and Economic Housing Developers of the Philippines for this opportunity to explain government policy as it is evolving. I got your questions ahead, so I don't know how to answer them because some of them, but instead, let me just share a few thoughts on how I see, how I assess basically what I would call what the next president should do for housing, or what the next president should do for the Philippines. It would be housing. So next. This presentation is about housing for all. There are three components: the state of housing in the Philippines, an alternative vision for housing, and what can we do for the sector moving forward. Next. So the state of housing in the Philippines, according to the Housing Secretary, the housing need from 2017 to 2022, that's the Duterte term, is 6.5 million. And by 2040, if we do nothing, it will hit 22 million. Very big number. But there is another number, of course, by NEDA, for a different assumption, estimating the housing backlog at 2 million houses. No definition whether it is socialized or it's basically they look at it essentially from the point of view of a basic need. In other words, people who have essentially no decent housing. Next. Salvi. So the demand is for low cost and social housing. If you look at the projected demand for housing from 2016 to 2030, which my staff derives, I maintain, how do I call it? When I was governor of Albay, I developed, I was very aggressive in supporting students. So now they are helping me too. Actually, I have what I call 5 summa cum laude from Ateneo, or from various academic, one from essentially economics, one for basically even epidemiologist. So, but this group basically supports, basically comes up with including one of the best data scientists in the world, the 4th best actually. So this is how we project demand for housing from 2016 to 2030 using certain parameters demographic, socio-demographic, and economic parameters. So, who cannot afford housing, and that is basically what the government should do, is 1.1 million. For socialized is 1.4 million. For economic, it's 2.6. That's actually the largest. So the total projected demand is actually 5.716 million. I guess that's between now and 2030. But the source of the data is the Philippine Statistics Authority. Next. Socialized housing is only around 24% of the housing market, but the supply is only 7.4%. So obviously, there is an immediate demand and supply gap, and this supply and demand gap, I think, partakes of the nature of, unfortunately, of a public good, because it is a basic need. And as I said, the vision should be housing for all. And if you go by that philosophy of housing for all, then the first line of defense, because the 1.1 million definitely should be taken care of by the government. But given the demand, and obviously the demand and supply gap, in this case, the supply is only 7.4%. In other words, we're not providing for 70%. If you go back, can you go back to the other slide? That's so in short, it partakes of a social nature and therefore deserves subsidy from government beyond taxation. I think there should be direct subsidy either to the buyer or to the developer or to the banker. Okay, next. The housing market price regulation right now is too general. Socialized housing is 480 to 580 for horizontal. For vertical, it's 600 to 750,000. For economic housing, 450 to 1.7. Medium cost is 1.7 to 4, and open market is 4 million. Prices that sound reasonable in one region would be unreasonable, especially where socialized housing is most needed. How can I take off this? I couldn't read the. I'm sorry. So in the Philippines, one only needs a wealth of 2.9 million to be part of the top percentiles. So medium cost is actually already very inaccessible, that 1.7 to 4 million. So price regulation not rooted in human experience distorts the market and forces developers to cut corners or not build low-cost housing at all. So that has to be addressed by regulation or by law. And of course, the creation of the Department of Housing should already provide the policy advocate within the cabinet, as well as, of course, a continuous continuous advocacy in competing for the resources of the scarce resources of our economy, or to at least be the voice for the not just for the housing industry, but rather for those who would use it next, who needs it next. The real problem, housing is an individualized effort rather than state-led. To compensate, the state gives easy-to-abuse tax incentives, I'm not referring to you, and exemption that benefit who can afford at least some of the out-of-pocket expenses. The HDMF, one of the best-run agencies of government, is also among the most poorly contributed to. Ito po sana yung gusto ko na taasan. One of the basic reforms, pension reforms I want, is really to sa Singapore ata umaabot ng 17% ang out of the total of 31%. Kung i-include mo yung SSS, yung the comparison of SSS plus health plus housing plus so sa atin I forgot how much do we pay for housing. So I think one of the key here would be institutional reforms in our contributory or water pension like. So there are housing projects, but there are also no master plan communities, although there are already. Socialized and low-cost housing offers very little financial incentives for developers to sink massive outlays on this sector. Next. In our country, housing, even urban housing, such as condominium, is seen as an investment rather than as a need or even as a right. Because housing is seen as an investment, those who can invest more can hoard more of our housing resources, and then they rent. There are no practical disincentives to owning multiple houses, for example, for investment. We do not have second home taxes. The wealthy can hoard housing. Whatever housing is left will increase in price due to supply and demand dynamics. The more this goes on, the less the poor can afford can afford housing. Next. That means poor system always lead to poor culture. Housing for the working Filipino also leads to urban decay. I think the next president can easily look at, for example, Quiapo, all these old Manila communities, Pandacan, Paco, and they certainly offer great superior economic returns to our economy if the urban redevelopment certainly would be one of the key priorities. Next. Or sprawl to prevent further urban decay. Kaya nga po dun sa create, pag tingnan nyo po, pag nag-invest ka sa Albay, automatic po, mayroon kang 17 years. If you are in, I think, I forgot, it's up to the SIPP, the Strategic Investment Priorities Plan. If I hope that they will put socialized and economic housing, because that gives you at least a minimum of, if you invest in Albay's on tier 1, that would be 7 years of ITH and 10 years of enhanced deduction. So aside from the VAT exemption, I think it's the ITH and the enhanced deduction, especially that you're heavily domestic value content. Kasi kung bumili ka ng domestic, imbes na let's say you buy 20 pesos of, you essentially, there is a 50% additional deduction from taxable income if you buy domestically. So if you move further away, let's say from Metro Manila, yung sa NCR, that would be 4 plus 7, 4 plus 10. Pag sa Albay, that would be 7 plus 10. Pag you move your operations to an economy that's essentially recovering from typhoons, like Albay, you get additional 2 years if, but I don't know whether it's applicable to you, but if you're now operating, for example, and you move your entire operations to Albay, you get additional 3 years. But I think it's more applicable to industries rather than to housing, I mean to industrial products. Next. So what's an alternative vision for housing? Next. Well, affordable housing can be beautiful housing. This is a typical public housing, an HDB in Singapore. Next. Salvi. Next.
Right.
So, but we need the will to face the hard truths. The rich hoard too much housing and property for housing, and we don't tax them enough for it. The role of socialized housing developers should not be to cover the whole value chain. Housing must be state-led. Tax incentive exemption on housing don't work for the poor. Affordable state housing backed by a sound saving system does. So sa tingin ko ang importante dito hindi yung but beyond kasi vetoed na yung VAT exemption sana for the yung higher exemptions. So I think there are non-fiscal support or incentives that the government can provide. Affordable state housing backed by sound saving systems does, I think. So segregated zoning is a bad idea. Human experience is not siloed into residential, commercial, or industrial zones. Mass home ownership in a densely populated country is also a bad idea. Next. In the densest metropolitan area, the rich own very large. You can easily see the visible. First one, La Vista, Loyola, LGB, Ayala Heights. I don't know. You just immediately see that the rich hoard too much land for housing and also creates a lot of traffic. Next. They also don't allow towers to be built. Property in NHA socialized housing project in Libis area on 1/4 according to social Quezon City SMB and they pay. Paano ba matatanggal tong picture ko? Salvi. Can I hide the thumbnail video? Okay, that's it. So it's worth around 1/4 according to the Quezon City. They pay the same for their roads. An empty lot in Corinthian Green Meadows area sell for 65 to 200K in the open market. So, well, they are not taxed enough. So, we need to restructure the way the government deals with housing itself. And I think this disequilibria can easily, since the need is in the cannot afford socialized and economic housing. So I think retweaking, I think essentially our priorities can easily release resources that can put these scarce resources where they give the highest return to the economy, at the same time fulfill our vision of housing for all. Next. So we punish high density living when it is more base efficient. The base construction cost for computing real property tax for building in Quezon City, residential condominium is 14,400, one family dwelling is 9,800. So depends on the typologies. The system appears to incentivize low density over high density living, but of course, as percentage of total cost is not. But except that, of course, we need, as I've said, we need to look at it empirically. So why are you taxing residential condominiums higher than single family dwelling, which of course uses more land, which is probably I think in the whole world, the Philippines is it's a no-brainer to own land because if you exclude the city states or the island states, the Philippines is number one in terms of the number of people per square kilometer. Actually, I hope I put it somewhere here. We have 465 people per square kilometer. China only has about 270. Ang nakakatalo lang sa atin is Taiwan, Vatican, Singapore, Macau, and Hong Kong, basically. But so land is very precious in this country. So next. Space, in short, is a very scarce resource. Tax incentive won't work because the poor can't buy at all. The share of households that need housing cannot afford to buy of any kind is 19% of the projected housing demand from 2016 to 2030. So no tax incentive will work for them. The VAT exemption threshold for low-cost and social housing is 1.5 and 2.5 for other housing. The wealth threshold to get the 1% of the Philippine population is 2.9 million. So we can easily see the disequilibrium here. Next. Tax incentives aren't really the best way to lower cost either. Vatable inputs are only 43% of housing cost, but exemption don't ultimately accrue in full to the end user. So ang mas ano ko dito is really to use create for housing by making housing under tier 1. At the same time, to move further away from metro, essentially NCR. That's how the create is structured. So if you look at this, the construction cost is structured, the battable import is 44, the non-battable is 37, the markup is 29. For real estate cost structure, the non-battable input is 22, the battable inputs, so the average is next. This is based on the IO input of the PSA. So exclusive zoning is also a bad idea. Mixed use is really the key. Commercial areas effectively slice the metropolis into segments, worsening traffic. You can immediately see the color scheming. Traffic is worst in commercial areas. The rest is urban sprawl. If people live near where they work and shop, there is less need for transportation, where we are spending almost the entire BBB, or almost 2 trillion. I think for trains alone, I think the DOTR, based on their estimates, they will be able to award about 1.6 trillion of transportation between now until the end of the term of the president. Next. Next, Saudi.
Yes, sir. Wait lang. May delay lang.
So the Philippines is a densely populated country. Housing should not be promoted as a close open quotation as an investment. It is the 23rd most populated country in the world, second in ASEAN. There are now 367 people per square kilometer. Among the countries with population above 1, only Bangladesh is denser. We cannot turn the entire country into subdivision. There isn't enough space. Hoarding residential properties investment only worsens the housing gap by making remaining housing more expensive. I'm not trying to, I'm just, how do you call that? Making, although, next. I'm not entirely convinced that. So we can do better. Next. So this is a Vienna public housing model. Next. I don't know whether the message is to build higher. Next. And I think that is where we can build on government-owned land that's sold to a private company, which then owns and operates the housing units under public oversight. Social housing is placed in desirable areas and required to meet architectural livability that make it appealing to people across the high income spectrum. Higher income tenants pay market rents, subsidizing the cheaper rents reserved for low income housing. In short, we can segment them. Typically, half of a building units are reserved for low-income people. Rent costs don't fluctuate wildly year over year because the government builds thousands of new social housing units every year, ensuring that supply keeps up with demand. Houses are not owned but rented with up to 99-year tenure. Social housing accounts for about 40% of the housing stock in Vienna. Incidentally, I haven't really, because housing is not my um, is hindi po is not my expertise. So I'm just using a lot of this data. Pero if you read, for example, economic literature, 78% of all the wealth created in Great Britain actually came from housing ownership. So sabi ko, bakit bakit hindi natin in this country, I think I haven't seen the a similar figure, but that's already very telling. I think even in the US, although they had bubbles and everything, but the wealth of nations apparently is very much linked to housing ownership or housing, in short, rights to housing, if it's up to, let's say, a 99-year tenure. Next. So what can we do for housing? Next. First, don't do no harm. CREATE did not reduce tax incentives for housing, but higher VAT threshold for sale of real property incurred the president's veto. We tried, but the 2020 investment priority includes mass housing. The new SIPP will include mass housing and is guaranteed at least Tier 1 incentive, 4 to 6 years of ITH plus 5 years of enhanced deduction. So this covers the development of mass housing unit based on a price ceiling of 2 million. This also covers in-city low-cost dwelling projects for lease and rent. This is based on the 2020 IPP, which is the first SIPP. Kasi imbis na, although magkakaroon tayo ng, we will draw up a grander SIPP or the Strategic Investment Priorities Plan under the CREATE. Yung current na IPP, yun muna ang gagamitin. So, ang based po sa policy statement ng DTI, ng BOI, yung mga nasa IPP na ngayon is assured, guaranteed at least Tier 1 and plus 5 years of enhanced deduction. And I guess that includes the spatial dimensions. So as you go further and further from Metro Manila, then contiguous to Metro Manila, basically that's Bulacan, Laguna, Cavite, Rizal, plus Metro Davao and Metro Cebu. The rest gets more, actually. Next. Ito ang problema, Fernan. So the incentives for, well, this is for exports. I don't think they will need that. As you can see here, there is always for Tier 1, there's 1 year more. If you're in Metro, if you're NCR 4 plus 5 for Metro adjacent, 5, then for all other areas is 5. But if you go to Alba, you get 7. And next, this is incentives for domestic enterprises. So what are the enhanced deduction? Power expense, 150%, the current allowable deduction. So if you use power, if you are in labor expense, 150% deduction from, so we'll not hit, while hindi namin may bibigay yung sa VAT, pero doon po sa ITH nyo, ay doon po sa tax, yung income tax, yung pre-tax profits nyo. If you do domestic input, that's 150%. And of course, the others you cannot use because although unless you are in manufacturing and of course for depreciation, but at least for domestic input expense, if you use you don't use imported products, you use domestically produced products, then you get 50% more in terms of tax deduction. And of course, for labor, of course, we know that housing is highly labor intensive and highly domestic intensive. So the bias towards domestic, and I think will result in tax savings and therefore cash flows for housing company, for housing developers. Next. So existing and likely COVID-19 interventions for housing are piecemeal and tangentially related. Pasensya na hindi ko na-approve yung mga sinisingit ko. So, yung guide bill will offer tax discount for MSME loans from Land Bank and DBP. SME definition, I think, is 5 million and 100 million. So the proposed Bayanihan 3 includes housing relief. Hopefully it is it is approved by Monday. Suspended for 3 months of affected family loans with NHA and Social Housing Finance, HSFC, sa gobyerno lang. So this could help, but it doesn't help the industry very much. Yung may mga utang na sa NHA ang mapagbibigyan kasi mas kontrolado ng gobyerno kaysa naman yung mga may utang sa inyo. So yung sa, I think we will not, di ko na mention na syempre na yung income tax nyo after, let's say, your income tax holiday, instead of 30%, 25%. And if your SMEs, as many of your players are, and I don't know whether I was able to cover how many of you would be considered SME, for if you're earning below 5 million, and your assets are below 100 million, then you have a lower income tax income tax of 20% versus 25% for the non-SMEs. Well, as co-chair of the Economic Stimulus and Recovery Cluster, I've been trying to provide a lot of support, knowing that the government is not as hindi ko mapagalaw po, although I tried so very hard. So, but I will try to propose restructuring packages for GFIs, for socialized housing providers with liquidity issues. I think our good friends at the 3 main GFIs, Land Bank, basically Land Bank, DBP, and of course one small one. So next. So the vision for low-cost and socialized housing is credibly funded. Yung CPF talagang tinitingnan ko tayo pinakamababa, 2% lang ang binibigay natin. Singapore po 17. Doon talaga nagsisimula lahat ng problema So ang binibigay natin sa 21 sa SSS, 21 ba? Yeah. 9 plus 12. So for pensions, so I think talaga you just have to follow the money and you will already understand why there is a problem. I think HDMF is a well-run company. Magagaling po talaga yung mga ano dyan. So sa pananaw ko, by providing more resources for pag naayos na po namin yung military and uniform personnel, kasi laki-laki ng problema, baka pumutok po yan in 5 years. Maging malaking fiscal crisis po. It's from only 34 billion 5 years ago, it's now 120 billion. And it's gonna rise to 1.5 trillion. But that's a separate issue. I think we need to look at the entire pension system, or how do we fund our future needs. And part of that really is now we need more public and private partnerships for housing, like the Vienna model, the infrastructure mass transport planned around worker housing, the Singapore model. We want mixed-use master plan communities near jobs, industrial planning where there's still that flexibility and space. And we need more progressive property taxation with revenues earmarked for socialized and economic housing. So, yan po ang pananaw ko. I'm not an expert in this. Pag-ibig is one of the best run government agencies during the COVID crisis. It was able to declare members dividend of 5.6 and 6.2%, but contribution is 1%, employee 2%, employer share for monthly 2% for above 1.5. But monthly salary cap is 5,000. So my intention really is to increase it. I think nag-file na ba tayo ng ano? Some of my staff kasi are scattered in all sorts of other things, no. But I think this is the key to your industry. You need to have the resources earmarked to socialize, and yung ano naman kasi cannot afford sa gobyerno yan. Did we file? Who answered?
Sorry, ako yung nagsabi.
Okay, anyway, akala ko yung staff ko. Next. So CPF savings may be used for full or partial payment of property and to service the monthly housing scene. And then you look at the division of the Central Provident Fund in Singapore, the CPF allocation for ordinary account is 23%. So kitang-kita nyo kagad dyan. Na sa atin, 21% para sa pension. Yung CTF nila, 8% para sa tayo naman, 12% for PhilHealth, for special accounts. So I mean, if you can immediately see here, the bias of the entire 23 plus 6 plus 8 plus 15, so they have a 37%, they have a 37%, how would you call that, future savings framework. So yung much of the future savings, mandatory future savings, or are actually dedicated to housing. So yun ang wala sa atin. Sa atin ay maximum 4%. So next. So you can immediately see from this. The Vienna model makes use of government land administered by private companies. This lowers the real property costs. Government has the power, you can lend to help fund private sector outlays. low risk lending because the developments are built on government land that government can just take possession of buildings if loan is defaulted on. Government can promote land value capture by leasing some spaces for businesses. So where we are just approved the new public-private partnership, which enshrines land value capture as being recognizing land value capture as part of the entire strategy of government for public-private partnership. Next. And of course, I think we need more to integrate and coordinate the way government directs its infrastructure, because the footprint of government, especially its infrastructure, lalo-lalo na yung mga transport, ay essentially directs also much of where I think government, for example, should already land bank in T4 from Santo Tomas going to Lucena or from Lucena going to Matnog. Instead of pag nandyan na saka ka mamimili, samantalang alam mo naman na i-PPPP, naka-PPP na po yung T4, pero ang namimili yata, syempre yung may-ari ng T4. So now you have T5. So kung saan dadaan yun, obviously, yun, dun dapat ang clustering mangyayari. Next. So, industry housing planning, building of new eco zones, and balik ka dun. Building of new eco zone, industrial zone should require provision for low-cost housing of workers. Ako, usually hindi ako mahilig sa mga mandatory kasi parang pero sa kasong to dapat may pag ginawa mo mandate dapat may incentive. So bakit mo pa i-mandate kung wala kang pang incentive? So ang importante niyan, ayusin mo yung framework. Hindi mo katulad ng yung mandatory credit to agri-agra loans, tapos bibigyan mo rin naman ng lusot. So wala rin naman credit to farmers. So essentially, ang gagawin mo is to increase the resources for that particular segment. Which brings me back to the CPF model of Singapore as the real starting point. And pag naayos na nga namin, ay file na po namin yung MUP, which could bust the entire budget of the government in if we don't do, kasi naka-index po yung at saka we've been hiring too many. I think every president hires 33% more military and uniformed personnel and adds 44% more to their salaries within their term. And that salary is carried over to the retirees. So, and they're survivors. So, baka by 2030 or 8 years from now, if you don't do anything, that will create a negative 7.2% GDP from baseline. It's currently at about 9.6 trillion of unfunded liabilities. Kasi wala ang contribution at wala rin direct to GAA. So yung buong GAA namin mapupunta lang po sa housing at saka sa pagbayad po ng sweldo so mawawala po yung capital outlays in danger po. So mixed-use zoning should not be discouraged. Balanced mixed-use areas should have lower assessment rate than purely commercial areas. So, but I think many local governments, since I came from one, I think we've been takot of landowners. Kaya Pero kung yung madiderive, kasi 5% lang naman yung mapupunta sa SEF, if we could earmark, for example, the higher valuation to socialized and economic housing, I think that should be a good start. But it's still small compared to what's needed of 5.7 million housing backlog. Next. I went ahead. Local government property classification systems should be harmonized to incentivize efficient use of residential land that is high density, low cost, and socialized housing. Discouraging dysfunctional hoarding of land in high density areas. Dito sa Metro Manila, ito po yung isa sa mga naging dahilan kung bakit nag-veto po yung increase in prices, yung VAT exemption. Kasi kung first time home buyer sana, I think I could have justified it and really fought against the veto. But the tendency is really since it's VAT free, the rich would just keep on buying and then rent it. So by imposing punitive rates and earmarking revenues for low-cost and socialized housing programs. Actually, itong industry nyo, no-brainer eh. Hindi ko alam kung bakit hindi tumatakbo eh. So either land taxes with option to use land as socialized housing instead of getting auctioned off. So yung mga ang dami-dami dito na hindi nagagamit, problema, how do you define idle land? Ilang years na walang gamit o ilang years na walang produkto. So that's I leave it to the experts or a committee to define it, basically. Next. So this way, people in socialized or low-cost housing can live in complete communities with facilities and businesses to service their needs. They live near their workplaces or have access to mass transport towards their workplaces. They can afford their houses better. This is more a statement of aspiration, may not even need to buy them through government-assisted construction and subsidized purchases and rent. They can use their savings towards obtaining low-cost or socialized housing. Next. I think that ends it. So first, I would like to ask your apology. This is not my line of expertise. I just tried to derive enough data that you can use. You can interpret it differently, but if I were the next president, the first thing I think housing for all would be one of those areas that is really no-brainer, because everybody needs a house, everybody needs a roof on their heads. So what you really need is a more systematic, as I have framed it. You have 5 building blocks for sustainable socialized and economic housing development for our country. So I would like to thank again Fernan for the good introduction. He knows me very well.
Yes po, Tito.
Actually,
we're very grateful. Yes po.
So thank you very much to everyone. I know you have a lot of questions I cannot answer, but I'll venture how to answer them.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tito. It's very yeah. Thank you for preparing that. A lot of questions have been flowing from the discussion, and you've aroused like a lot of interest in the topics that you've covered, and we have some questions, the prepared questions that we sent over in advance.
Di man na-approve yung arise eh.
Yeah, well, that's question number 1. If you'll allow me to read out the questions, is that okay, Kong Joey? then we can discuss them. So for the first question, on the Arise bill, which aims to re-energize the economy in response to the effects of the pandemic, we noticed that infrastructure is prioritized. Aside from target infrastructures in transportation, energy, and communication, how can social infrastructures, particularly socialized housing, contribute to the economic recovery we're aiming for post-pandemic? Yeah, that's the first question.
And the first question is, we did not approve Arise.
Yeah.
I don't know how to, but certainly, inuna kasi yung health para, alam mo, kung ma-vaccinate mo lahat, balik tayo, I think by 2023, balik tayo sa dati. So,
Opo.
kailangan natin is faster vaccination. So, inuuna naman ng gobyerno, except that syempre, nakikipag-agawan ka pa sa ibang countries for the vaccines. Well, if you look at it, you have the economic requirements, you have which includes transportation, and then you have the social requirement, which includes housing, and then of course you have the financial and fiscal. So I guess you need to just have to. Dito sa Albay, alam mo naman kung ano inuna ko, di ba? Social.
Yeah.
Since 2007, libre ang college, libre ang wala pa yung libre ang lahat ang PhilHealth, no billing, no excess billing na tayo since 2007 when I was governor. So, siyempre, unahin mo yung buhay ng tao. And then, saka ka mag-transit to education para they would have the means to then from education transit ka na sa infrastructure. That was how, but that was based on advice on situation during the time na andito nung naging governor ako.
Opo. I guess it's understandable why the health, during the pandemic, that was prioritized. I have one of the directors that's raising their hands. Attorney Ryan Tan. Yeah. Ryan, would you like to make a manifestation?
Good afternoon, Kong Joey. I think we met each other when I represented this organization during the committee hearing for the Create bill. And I think in one of our exchanges, and also consistent with what you mentioned this afternoon, is that concept of balanced development for the developers, whereupon developers are required to put up 15% of their development based on cost or area for socialized housing as a matter of requirement, and in exchange for that are tax exemptions whenever we sell those socialized housing packages. Kong, do you still share your do you still maintain your view when you mentioned baka dapat tanggalin na natin yung balanced development na yan in view of your comment that socialized housing should be state-led? Is that what you meant, sir, when you said dapat state-led?
Dahil sa wala, kasi, parang ipapass on mo rin doon sa iba, di ba? Tapos parang lang yun it's how do you call that? The best effort of the government who can hindi mo magawa yung dapat gawin mo. Yung dapat gawin mo kasi dito yung CPF, kailangan mo ng pera. So pag wala ka ng CPF, dadaan ka dyan sa mga ganong klase ng mga style na para sa akin ginagawa lang mo lang mas mahal at tapos yung allocation hindi mo naman na-monitor o hindi mo naman na oversight. So pag sinabi kong dapat state-led, dapat direct subsidy na ng gobyerno.
Mhm.
So, magkaroon na lang ng competition sa let competition take care of the prices, but the government essentially finances the socialized and economic buyers. My own bias is to finance the buyer, subsidize the buyer, and let competition take care of the prices of uh, of the housing developers in this sector. That's my bias.
Yes, sir. Sir, actually, second question, Fernan, if okay lang, no?
Okay lang.
Of course,
Yeah, please go ahead.
we feel well nasayangan, sir, dun sa veto of the president, and I noted your comment that it could have been we could have convinced the president had it been for a first-time home buyers. Sir, we'd like to inform you na in the past kasi we had initiatives. In fact, a draft bill. We remember that was with Congressman Yap for a first-time home buyers bill. So, based on from your perspective as a legislator, when if we revive that kind of initiative, would that be a welcome development from people who see the bigger picture from your perspective?
Nasa inertia at inertia in motion towards election kami. So, parang yung mga, unless there is a very strong vested interest,
Opo.
I can't see the prospect of that moving forward. Na there are so many competing ano eh. Dami pa katulad ko, dami I have 9 bills waiting to be already on the floor. And for every day, I've been waiting for my turn to sponsor and debate. So, and there's also Bayanihan 3, where
Yes.
I've been trying to insert yung rental refinancing ng ano para makapagbayad nga sa mga ano ng hindi sila maano mapaano mapalayasin yung ating po mga tao. Pero the real, I would rather focus on the structural, which is really focus on HDMF and increase the just like what Singapore did. 23% of the 37% is for housing. It's very clear and simple. That solves everything, including your socialized, economic, and even government. I think can take care of the those who cannot afford. That's why I started with that first data, which is the 5.7 million, wherein 1.4 million cannot afford, but the bulk, I think, can be supported. I will. So, maliit ang chance na ma-approve yung first-time home buyers incentive. I can file it, but I cannot promise it can be and sisirain nyo lang yung yung batting average ko kasi most of the laws here right now are mostly my initiatives. So,
Unless, sir, congratulations po. We read in the papers that the most recent bill that was adopted came from your initiative. So congrats, sir. And thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Masipag lang ako.
Kong Joey, I would like to recognize the founder of ProcTech Consortium of the Philippines, a certain Emma Imperial. She'd like to be recognized and say hello.
Your mother.
My primo. And the most intelligent congressman that I know. Anyway, I'm your fan all the way.
Oy, remember that our forefather was Carolina Sarte Duran Imperial, huh?
Exactly. You're the finest. Okay. So my first question is really on the Create Bill, on how the developers right now can have something, even if it was vetoed by the president. Because when we were listening to a BOI director, she said that under the Create Bill, they still incentivize renewable projects, anything to do with renewable. And medyo na-hit kami dahil yung 2 million na hinahabol namin, sana maski na 3 million as is, naging 2 million na lang siya, pati sa BOI incentive. However, doing sa renewable, there is an opening there that our company is recognized as the pioneer for solar powered mass housing community, and this is a recognition even by the IFC and World Bank. And what we were asking the BOI is that if we, since it's in the create bill, and if it's going to be a solar powered community and it falls under renewable, can it now be removed from the limitation of the 2 million because it's still in the create bill? So that's my first question.
Ano, ma'am, magkakaroon dyan, ring fencing. When you say ring fencing, for the houses, it's the 2 million, but for the renewable portion, which we can make estimates, the renewable incentive will remain.
Okay.
So we ring fence the two types of businesses. One is the provision of power. The other one, of course, is but I think we can make a very strong case that if you use too much land, yun nga lang ang problema ko sa yung renewable yung nasa ano lang, nasa
Top of the roof.
or is your renewable the one that's in Santo Tomas?
The renewable, when we say solar park community, it's more of 1,000 homes inside the community. It's not just one solar rooftop home. So you come up with more than a 1 megawatt production of solar electricity, so that it becomes an innovative way of I don't know if you there's ring fence.
Alam
So
mo, next time you write me immediately. Kasi next time you have problems, you can direct it to me, because as I've said kanina, I have pretty good influence in the way the legislative intent. So I could have defined the legislative intent before the IRR came out. So right now, let me try, because the IRR naman can change.
yeah.
So let's just make a case.
Yes.
Kasi I made big cases. I handle big. Marami po ako na paano na this is the way it should be interpreted, and so I think we can make a try.
Yeah, and I just want to explain, that there's another move by some fintech people to do a parang what do you call that? A coin, ano ba yung change blockchain inside a community that has solar. So for instance, if the whole community will have solar and the technology of blockchain will be implemented, that becomes another innovative way of pushing renewable. And it falls in the create bill also.
Yung blockchain definitely is tier 3, but it will be ring fenced.
Yeah, those ring fences.
Your renewable portion will be ring fenced, and your housing will be ring fenced. So you will have different incentives, not one size fits all type of incentive. We will incentivize each and every at various levels of incentives. Pero yung mga minention mo, yung tatlo, lahat sila incentivizable, or they have incentives inside the creative.
Okay, so maybe we can have a test case so that it can just be like one, and then because if let's say in a community there's 2 million, there's 3 million, there's 4 million, it's so hard to segregate them, right? So,
yung developer naman ang point of case namin, not the home buyer.
Okay. The second question and my last
Okay.
is that there is a pag-ibig fund I listened kanina that you're doing something for Pag-ibig Fund, and currently there are a lot of green funds around, and even National Homes now is working with IFC and World Bank. And with that green fund, the buyers now becomes in an advantageous state because they get half of the interest rate by taking out through a green fund. And what we would like to just request is to inject a little bit of this in the Pag-ibig Fund members, that if Pag-ibig Funds developers will get into a green fund project, then they will be able to also access the lower interest rate offered by IFC and World Bank to the funding institution. Kasi right now, even the private banks are being offered by IFC and World Bank on green construction financing. So it's all around. So it's just now letting the government financing institution that helps the housing join that program so that we can be able to give it to our home buyers.
I'll
So
tell
that-
Modi and I'll tell Cecil Borromeo, don't worry. I've texted already.
Thank you. That's it.
Both of them
Okay.
are very good friends.
Thank you, Primo. Thank you.
Thank you, Primo.
Thank you very much. Thank you
It's
to
a-
the
it's a
founder of
affair.
PropTech Consortium. But
This is a family affair. I'm in
I
my
think-
house in Daraga, the former chief.
Okay. So,
I think most of us are working from home. Tito, I think you can count on OSHDP if you ever need any, because the guys here in OSHDP, I've been working with them for several years, and they're very technical in terms of housing, and I've learned so much from this group. And if ever we can do anything to help you in terms of this field and this industry, we're more than happy to step up. I'd like to introduce Nicole Choa, another board of director.
Okay.
She also has some questions, po.
I think before you let go of Emma can solve Rapu-Rapu. Because the solution to Rapu-Rapu is solar.
Rap.
solar. Yeah, why not? I should go there, but I don't know how to go there. Yeah, what we should visit it when it's there's no COVID.
They pinutulan ng NGCP at pinutulan ng Aleco kasi nga
Oh, no.
but I think Land Bank is willing to finance their debt for as long as they shift to solar. So these are existing homes, but putting up the solar. So essentially ang i-finance ng so para ng Land Bank yung lahat. Kasi sa Rapu-Rapus there are 700 pero 4 lang ang nagbabayad. So dahil namamahalan nga sa kuryente. So anyway, can I go to Nicole? That's too much of a family affair already.
Yeah.
In touch.
But put me on that team, Tito and Mom. Put me on that team to help those guys with the solar houses. Nicole.
Okay,
You're next.
so
Are you there?
first off, thank you for accepting to be our speaker in this housing talk. Diba? One of the questions of our audience is that it seems that the government knows the housing concerns right now. What measures are now on the pipeline to resolve this? And since limited na yung current administration, do you think there is much that can be done?
I think that's a very political question. Are you trying to put me in danger?
It's just
No, yeah, Nicole has no intentions to put you in danger. She's
I just read one of the
I
questions.
think that question should be asked from the housing secretary. I think he's also has very limited resources. So I think they only produced 14,000 units of NHA housing last year. My goodness. So you can just imagine. Siyempre, andyan yung pandemic, inuna talaga. We put about last year, 700 billion of discretionary, virtually 70% ng discretionary funds were put into COVID. So, and the revenues collapsed by 400 billion. So, ang laki talaga yung yung epekto. Ma'am, I will answer you. Can I answer you? Can you send me that question directly and I will answer you directly? Baka kasi
Okay, will do.
to avoid misunderstanding.
Another question from the audience is that, is it possible for Congress to make the RPT lower for mixed-use land?
Yeah, it's local What we can do really is to allow
Localized.
to segment through the National Valuation Service para hindi discretionary sa local in other words, there will be a National Valuation Service that essentially determines what is the range values for certain location and certain types of properties. Ang isang gusto kong matanggal is yung RPT on machinery actually. Kasi it disincentivizes investment in infrastructure. Yun ang isa sa mga reform na gusto ko.
Okay. Thank you so much for answering my question, the questions. I think we have other questions also from our other directors. Attorney Ryan. Any other? Okay. How about si Tito Mars?
Yeah, good afternoon, Cong Joey. I am a
Yes,
great
sir.
fan of yours, no?
Ah,
But anyway, that was certainly a very refreshing on the part on your suggestion regarding contributions to well, comparing the Singapore model and our own Pag-ibig Fund. But I think one of the main limitations has always been the reluctance of the labor sector and even maybe the management, the owner sector in our industry to raise the contributions. No, I don't know if your idea is for the government to really fund the increased contributions for housing.
parang hindi. I think we will provide subsidy. Meron na kasi kami assignment yung 1.4 million who cannot afford it.
Yeah.
Yung who can afford it, I think it should be a CPF.
Yes. Sana po ganun. Yun nga po parang may reluctance. For example, I think yung present drive to increase the contributions, no? Medyo pinostpone pa ho because of the pandemic, no? And understandably so. However, I think really the fundamental solution is to increase the resources, no? Another point ho, as Vice Chairman of the Committee on Appropriations, yung budget po natin sa housing, pirming nare-reduce. Napakaliit na pirming nare-reduce. 5 billion na ho, I think 2020, tapos na-reduce pa to about 4 billion, I think, or less than 4 billion in 2021. No? And that's, ang marami po doon, napupunta pa siguro sa admin. Ano? So, that's too small, no? for housing. No? Yun naman pong mga ginagawa, yung sinabi po yung mga sa NHA, for example, producing only a small portion, 14,000. Marami po doon, alam natin, yung pang mga sa relocation, no? relocation ng mga build, and then those sa disaster-prone areas, and not really for, a good portion of the population that is really needing housing, yung mga nasa ISF naman na other than those that are in infra projects. So, ano po kaya ang incentives natin or initiatives or ano magagawa natin para medyo mabigyan ho yun ng, even back to the former funding that the housing sector used to have in the past?
I think one solution there is to make it local. Kasi
Local.
we're transferring 382 billion in ERA to local governments next year.
Yung Mandanas ruling.
Oo, yung Mandanas. Ang laking problema rin namin yan. So, goodbye housing yan. So, bayan 5, wag ka nang umasa. Kaya, ang sa tingin ko talaga dyan kailangan, kasi yung CPF, yung structure, basta nakikita ng tao na that it's working and the HDMF is really working very well. So, I think all you have to do is really to enlarge and engage. Kasi kung sa Singapore, 23% of savings go to housing, and in this country, only 2%. And now you understand why housing is in deep shit.
Yeah. Kulang talaga po ng resources. That's
And it should
basic,
be
very basic.
Yeah, kailangan regulatory yan. Kahit saan, anywhere in the world, it should be regulatory. Kailangan talaga sa batas na dapat mapandingan ng Common Provident Fund ang housing.
Yeah.
Ang gobyerno magbayad para sa cannot afford.
Yeah.
Pero yung
very fundamental.
Yeah.
Last point po, yung tungkol sa land. No, land is, well, everybody agrees. No, nobody disagrees that it is the main problem from the point of view of supply. No, and ang dami na efforts to identify public land, like yung sinasabi natin na pinresent nyo, the Vienna model. No, ang problema po hindi ma-unearth o there's supposed to be an identification of all of those public land or even public idle lands, no? And of course, there it stops, no? Kasi wala pa akong nakikita po. The industry hasn't really seen an inventory of available public land na sana po, yun ang first step in trying to, solve at least a good portion of the land access problem, no?
Saldi, can you take down note of that and then we will give you the answer. We will look for the numbers.
Sige po, yun po, malaking bagay yun because there is a lot of public land and everybody agrees on that. But there seems to be really no list, so to speak, of where are these land, what is the status of these lands. Wala pong ganon. So thank you po, Cong. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Mars. Cong Joy, do you have time for a couple more questions? We have some questions that the board would like me to ask. Well, there's one question, number 4, regarding HB 9214, or the Budget Modernization Act. It aims to propose reforms in the national budget process. What are your thoughts regarding the components of the current national budget system that need reform, and why do we need to address them? Yun po.
Yung most relevant for housing there will be the rules on the multi-year obligational authority. I actually invented that in 2006 when I was chairman of the budget under President Gloria, since they take some time to complete. So we need to clarify how the multi-year obligations are honored so that we can pay contractors and service delivery agents on time. while also ensuring that completion standards are met. So that is that portion there that concerns your industry, the multi-year obligation authority.
Okay, wonderful. And then consequently, how can these measures ensure an efficient and equitable budgeting process, especially to public
And let
infrastructure projects? Yes, Bob. And those that are usually underfunded.
um, I can give you a good answer. Make me president.
Yeah, you have my vote. You definitely have my vote. Yeah. So, okay,
No,
that's solved.
it's
So
mabuting pa hindi wala naman media dito, no?
wala.
Ay, mabuti. Sa Diyos ko.
You can speak freely. It's just being recorded and put on Facebook Live.
I don't.
It's a Facebook Live.
Alam mo, ano yan eh.
Okay.
Well, my point there is that is where your value system comes in, di ba? If you know what are the basic needs of the people, then that's the only basis for you to govern if you are able to provide them. And as I've said, that I've done health for all, done education for all, college education for all. Now we should do housing for all.
Okay.
I think
Thank you.
I think it's high time to do housing for all.
Yeah, thank you very much. I share in that sentiment, Tito. You know, like when you said that the wealth of nations and housing and real estate is a tool. I'm also an economist. You know, I agree with that completely. You know, and you know, as a tool for building wealth for the very you know, underserved, and I think owning a house, being able to invest in real property, that's the way to move our people upwards. I understand you're very busy. You have a plenary sponsorship coming. Maybe one last question, and then we can wrap things up, Tito.
Alam mo, I think first there's basis to be optimistic about the Philippines. I hope by February we'll start. By October, I think the mood will change. And this is really the time to do all the reforms. And Congress is really trying to rush, especially revenue generating measures, so that by the time that we need to do the right things, we have the resources for it. Yung sinabi ko kanina na 78%, surprisingly, yan pala yung came from home ownership. So, yung panahon ni President Gloria kay Madam, sabi ko, Ma'am, hindi binibilang yung BPO sa GDP. Kako ipabilang mo, kaya I proposed what I call Plan 789. People were laughing at me. But I knew then that if you include BPO in the gross value added, immediately, yung unang taon of the program, nag 8.4% yung GDP. So there are things like housing, which has very high domestic value added, high domestic labor. So I think it's a no-brainer. We just need really the correct strategy. I think all we need is a strategy. And strategy means that includes the political will, and some financial savvy is secondary actually. So I would like to thank the OS. How do you pronounce?
OSHDP. Yep.
OSHDP na?
OSHDP po. OSHDP. OSHDP. Opo. Yeah.
Mas madali dati yung Sheda eh.
Sheda's also here. Sheda's here and Rhea's here. We all support each other's events. And,
so I promise you two things.
Yeah, we're well represented.
Can you note that? The first-time home buyers, and the one is the list of public idle lands. Sadi is my staff, so we can deliver to Mars.
Yeah.
Copy, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, si Saldi's
Okay.
been very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah,
Jerwin,
thank you po. Thank you.
back to you, Jerwin.
Yes. But before we formally close the program, may I ask everyone in the room to please turn on your camera? We'll have a virtual crowd chat.
Oh God, there are many. 79.
Several windows po yan, Tito. Smile lang ng smile.
Yes. Smile lang na smile. Okay, taking the ones in the first gallery. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay. Second one. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay. Third one. Okay. Oh, may nag-open pa ng camera. Okay. 1, 2, 3. There you go.
Pang-apat, Waki.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. And also, to formally close our program, may I invite our chairman of the board, Mr. Marcelino Mendoza, to give his message of appreciation for
Oy,
our
Mars, I have to
today.
leave. It's 3 o'clock.
Thank you,
Okay
Tito.
po,
Thank
sige
you very
po.
much.
I will close it already after you leave even. Yeah. Okay. Well, there you have it. Straight from the principal author of Republic Act 11534 of the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises Act, or the CREATE law, in the House of Representatives. And as a matter of fact, the CREATE law is touted as the largest fiscal stimulus for the private sector in the country's history. It is expected to provide an estimated 1 trillion of tax relief to enterprises over the next 10 years. As discussed earlier, this was signed into law on 26 March 2021 and took effect on April 12 this year. To date, the Department of Trade and the Board of Investments are coming up with the SIPP, or the Strategic Investment Priorities Plan, which will be the priority list of businesses and activities to be accorded with incentives under the law. To further enlighten us, maybe we should have another second and third edition of this forum on stimulus, on measures on housing in other agencies. Let me again thank our esteemed guest, Honorable Representative Joey Sarte Salceda, for giving us his time and effort to explain and to discuss his views on housing for all and the stimulus measures being undertaken by the government to help us recover from the adverse effect of this pandemic. Certainly, his views on the Singapore model and our very own Pag-ibig Fund are very refreshing and would be game changers. We also like his point to go local for funding, and we hope that we can quote him on all of these proposals. Again, we would like to thank our OSHDP member participants, our friends, our sponsors, and our supporters. I hope that you are clarified on your specific concerns. Again, thank you. This is OSHDP Housing Talks 2021, and keep safe always. Good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you, Mars. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Fernan.
Yeah, welcome.
Congrats. Congrats,
Yeah.
Fernand.
Congrats.